If you would see the very heart of England, the green and pleasant land whose fertile acres have inspired poets and bred men of action, go to the Midlands. Here is Shakespeare's England, and there are parts of it that have seen little change since his time. For these Midland people, while moving with the times, have kept the Shakespearean tradition very much alive. Another tradition has lived on and flourished, one that was already old when Shakespeare was a boy. The tradition of craftsmanship, of doing a job well and taking a pride in it. Some of the older crafts are dying out, but for every one that passes into disuse, 100 new skills are born. The tools and methods change, the vital spirit lives on, increases and builds new empires of technical achievement, rising up out of the green fields. One is here at Solihull, between industrial Birmingham and the green pastures of Warwickshire. Its subjects are the craftsmen who make Rover cars. To trace the Rover story back to its beginning, we must go to Coventry. 80 years ago or more, James Starley was making improvements on the bicycle, the terrifying penny farthing. The safety bicycle, perfected by his nephew J.K. Starley, who took over the business in 1881, quickly replaced the old-style machine. The comfortable, improved bicycle opened up such a vista of travel that it was suitably named the Rover. With the sport made safe even for the fair sex, the bicycle became a symbol of dashing emancipation. Those were the days when life was really speeding up. The enormous popularity of the bicycle was merely to set the scene for another innovation, the motor car. In 1904, the Rover Company produced its first cars. They were greeted with enthusiasm. A journalist wrote of a sweetly running car free from harassing peculiarities. People of fashion and the world of style found its lines had a graciousness that fitted in well with the tenor of life. Meanwhile, the pace of motors was speeding up to alarming proportions. The Rover had 8 horsepower, 1 cylinder, and 2 years later, Thomas Jefferson drove one of these remarkable vehicles from Coventry to Constantinople, over roads scarcely worthy of the name, through country that few modern drivers would care to risk. Up to now, the Rover Company had not played a great part in motor racing, but in 1907, a car was entered for the Isle of Man Tourist Trophy. Despite torrential rain, the sturdy Rover forged ahead and won the event. The 1909 Rover showed improvements on earlier models and did much to establish the company's reputation for solid engineering. Between 1910 and 1920, despite the restrictions on motoring imposed by the First World War, the Rover Company had some notable successes in hill climbs and reliability trials, often with the famous Rover motorcycle. C.T. Newsom captained the successful team that won the Isle of Man Team Prize in 1913 and made the fastest time of the day at Caerphilly Hill Climb in the same year. In the optimistic years following the First World War, this Rover car was a model of executive decorum. And while formality lingered on in the older institutions and events, this doctor's car was typical of the more breezy approach to professional life and motoring. It was in this period that the sea-roving Viking mascot was adopted to symbolize the name Rover, inherited from bicycling days. The 1924 model is still remembered in motoring circles for its simplicity, style, and advanced engine design. In the 1930s, life suddenly began to be very real, very earnest, and very competitive. The rapidly diminishing number of manufacturing firms in this country vied with each other in cutting prices. The nation's leaders called for economy. The Rover Company took a bold step. Considering that high quality was the soundest economy, it withdrew from the cutthroat race and decided to concentrate on a car designed and built to the most exacting standards. In the 9 years that followed, competition eliminated all but a small number of motor manufacturers. The Rover policy was justified. results of this continuing policy are apparent today, when Rover cars of the 1930s, nursed by their owners with all the loving care that such a car commands, are still in heavy demand. The war came, and with it a new word, to Concentrate. The Rover Company's Coventry works, marked as a top priority on the Luftwaffe's operational maps, were not spared. Only one thing was not destroyed in that night of baptism by fire, the will to win. The Rover Company made a fighting comeback. In a shadow factory at Solihull and elsewhere, it started making Meteor engines for the Cromwell tank. Hercules and Lysander aircraft were also to be a part of the company's contribution to the war effort. The jet aircraft engine was to provide another outlet for the company's engineering skill and experience, converting a brilliant dream into a piece of practical engineering called for new materials, new methods, new techniques. A few years after the war, the Rover Company produced the Land Rover, most versatile wheeled vehicle ever made. This complete departure from routine car manufacture surprised the world. Meanwhile, one of the first British cars with a post-war look was the 1950 Rover, additional proof that the company was marching with, or even ahead of, the times. And looking ahead of the times was another project at Solihull, the gas turbine engine that one day is going to revolutionize internal combustion. With Jet 1, the original model, now in the Science Museum, research is forging ahead, and this base unit is used for development, a mobile test bed. A new conception and a new form of motoring are seen in T3, the gas turbine prototype car. Only a beginning, it is already accepted as the pattern for motoring in the years ahead. But behind this experiment was a flow of normal Rover cars. In the post-war years, to own a Rover became more and more a desirable objective, and production increased with demand. Once a driver had owned a Rover, it raised his appreciation of what pleasure and satisfaction such a good car could give. The world appreciates progress and new conception. And now, with all that had been learned in 60 years, the Rover Company began developing a new car to meet the needs of wider markets. The 3-litre, bigger, longer, lower than other Rover cars, more roomy and more powerful. Conception of the 3-litre began with the directors briefing the stylist, who then translated a multitude of guiding principles into hundreds of working drawings. With his experienced team of artists, modelers, engineers, he worked on every detail of the car, looked at it from every angle, and examined every possible advantage. After months of this process, with fundamental changes and seemingly trivial alterations to detail, a basic line was decided upon. The first tangible stage was to make a quarter-scale model in clay, and at last an idea emerged of how the car would look. A gracious design with a continental verve, with an appeal to all the world's markets. A wooden mock-up, complete in essential details, was an early stage of the interior design. This wooden lay figure, weighted at various points to reproduce the exact distribution of a human's weight, was #1 passenger. An elegant car must appeal to elegant drivers, and the woman's angle was studied when designing the interior. It is no good building beautiful seats that will ladder nylons or doors in which a skirt might catch, so the feminine approach was covered thoroughly. The fascia panel again was first and foremost practical, but also had to look distinctive. Color was all important from the word go. One method of studying the effect of light on different planes was to spray paper with lacquer and try it against the contours of the full-scale car model. The Rover company has always preferred colors of restraint, and this preference was to be followed in the new car. At the same time, in the engineering drawing office, every board was taken up with some detail of the priorities assigned to the engineering department. The design of the new engine, transmission, suspension, and construction. In the experimental department, prototype engines were made, tested, modified, remade. The 3-liter engine was a development of the famous 90 engine. It had improved low-speed torque and pulling power. One of its outstanding features was the new 7-bearing crankshaft. Another was the single carburetor, which has advantages over the twin system in many parts of the world where servicing opportunities may be infrequent. The Rover designed roller tappets operating on a 6-bearing camshaft showed a distinct departure from the old type engine. At last, a prototype emerged from the shop. It was a complete prototype of the finished car and was to undergo 2 years of intensive punishment on the road so that any defects could be eliminated from the start. This car and one of its replicas went through many months of testing at the Motor Industry Research Association's test track, and the car that can stand up to thousands of miles of this and the other tests carried out by Rovers is fit for anything. If it is not shaken to breaking point on the pave, fast periods on the switchback humps may still find a weakness. And the gradients of 1 in 4 and 1 in 3 are as steep as anything encountered on the roads of the world. At this stage, and at all stages in the manufacture of any Rover car, the Quality Control Department has complete authority over all others in maintaining quality standards. Often, the Rover standards for raw materials are so high that nothing is commercially available. So their steels and alloys have to be individually made to detailed Rover specifications. Projection microscopes are used to check the physical structure of samples. A specially designed cabinet in which cultures of virulent molds grow under tropical conditions is used for testing fabrics and upholstery materials. Components bought out are subjected to rigorous tests. Heat treatment is one of the tests applied to rubber components, which must have a guaranteed life of many tough years. A fatigue tester reproduces on a laminated torsion bar the stress of hundreds of thousands of rough motoring miles, and the parts are put through this ordeal until they snap. The road prototypes are off the road meanwhile, and electronic equipment records the way they are standing up to strains far greater than any the car will ever be required to meet on the road. At the engine works, more tests are being made, this time to see that materials coming from suppliers reach the standards set by the purchasing office. A camshaft is checked for hardness, and a record kept of the pressure needed for a diamond to make a mark on it. A loaded hammer is swung down on a thin billet of metal. The weight taken to snap it and the way it breaks determine the true temper of the metal. Other samples are given a tensile test, gripped at both ends and pulled until the shape changes and they begin to stretch. At last they snap, and the dial keeps a record of the point at which they yielded. In the gearworks, the most precise machinery made in the world is used to grind the wheels. There is scarcely a chance that there could be any irregularities in these gear wheels, but to obviate the slightest possibility, women stone each wheel to remove any bits of metal adhering to it. Every wheel is measured by this specially designed machine. The graph recording its shape is filed away so that if any part of a Rover gearbox failed, its life history could be checked. Then the gears are paired, mated for the rest of their lives. They are run together, and skilled craftsmen listen for the slightest sound of disharmony. If the noise is wrong, the match is imperfect, and the wheels are changed. Elaborate equipment, also designed and made in the works, since nothing like it can be bought elsewhere, is used to test the finished gearboxes. One of the processes here is carburizing camshafts. Like all the stages in the manufacture of a Rover car, this is closely controlled by scientific methods plus long experience. The exact temperature at which quenching is done could make or mar the vital component. One of the most vital parts of an engine is the piston. And for this reason, the Rover company makes its own to Rover standards of precision. Within a tolerance of 1/10,000th of an inch, there are 5 sizes of piston, ensuring a perfection of matching unique in the motor industry. When it comes to engine assembly, it is easy to see how Rover cars have achieved their fame for reliability. The engines are precision built by men who go to great lengths and take exceptional trouble rather than run the slightest risk of imperfection. Every complete 6-cylinder engine is balanced, another Rover feature that is unique. This delicate piece of apparatus had to be specially designed for the purpose, as no equipment of such high standards could be obtained outside. As an additional test of performance, every engine is given a running test lasting 5 hours non-stop before it can be approved as fit to go into a car. Final adjustments are made and the engine is smooth and sweet. In the new paint shop, built to coincide with the production of the new 3-litre car, bodies are proofed against corrosion with a variety of processes before finally being sprayed. Then they are stoved, and only the ones that achieve complete perfection go on to the assembly shop without reworking. Finally, the component parts are brought together at Solihull, and on the car assembly line, the new shape of the 3-litre can be seen. Its precision-tooled and elaborately tested parts are assembled at last. Take 3 whole cowhides of the finest quality, tan them to the softness of a kid glove, dye them with pleasing shades of color. Throw away all but the finest pieces, and you have the upholstery for one Rover car. Visitors to the works are often astonished by the number of operations carried out by hand. One reason for doing so is that hand polishers could detect and remedy the tiniest flaw in the paintwork. Now comes the time for the first of the new cars to be tested. Every part of it has been tested along the line, and a final visual check of every part was made before it passed these doors. But like every Rover car, it is going to be driven under expert observation for 20 miles or more on the private factory test track. From the moment he picks it up, the tester has his eyes and ears open. Part of the track is covered with artificial bumps. If there were a squeak or rattle, this section would show it up. The sharp bends on the track are a good test of smooth gear change, although the car can and will take the whole circuit comfortably in top. All the controls, including every switch, are checked over, from lights to screen spray and wipers. After more mileage on the track comes the brake test, to make sure the car will stop dead straight at varying pedal pressure. This car will soon leave the works and go out into the world. The test driver's report will be filed away for many years to come, part of the pedigree certificate of a thoroughbred. For every Rover product is a thoroughbred in the true sense of the word, the outcome of the consistently high standards of a long lineage and the detailed care of today's grooming. Thoroughbred status cannot be achieved overnight, or even in a few years. And having been achieved, it can never rest on its laurels. Each Rover model has a splendid engineering tradition behind it, and a splendid future ahead of it. In short, a car designed and built in the Rover tradition.